Hello, everyone. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today and HitMic, and we're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in healthcare marketing. And today's guest is Mike Cuesta. He's partner at Atomic Health. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, John. Excited to be here.
Yeah, well, Mike and I go way back, a lot of years in health IT. Excited that, really, I mean, it's amazing you've created Atomic Health after all the years working in EHR vendor, health IT. So, anyway, I know your background, but for those that don't, tell us a little bit about yourself and Atomic Health.
Sure. Thanks, John. I'm Mike Cuesta, currently the founding partner of Atomic Health. As you kind of alluded to, I was formerly the chief marketing officer at CareCloud, where I started as the designer there at the founding of the company, maybe 12 years ago. Atomic Health is a design agency focused on helping healthcare tech and digital health companies level up their branding, product UI, UX, and digital experiences. We're mostly based in Miami, but we have a team of designers all across the country. And we work 100% remotely, which has been really, really, really interesting and fun. We love what we do, and we're very fortunate to have incredible clients across healthcare that we get to work with every day on new products, brands, and websites.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you part of the HitMit community. And, because when I went to conferences, I always thought CareCloud had one of the most refined, polished brands across everything that you did. So I think it's cool that you're going to bring that to a lot of other brands that that maybe need some help. But let's talk about that because I'm not really a design guy. I'm the opposite. I'm a practical, functional guy. So
Yeah.
help us understand if you're someone like me, why should these healthcare companies really care about their approach to design?
Yeah. Well, I think number one, when done well, I think design is actually a pretty critical, like, competitive advantage. There are, like, generally two ways people look at design. People either think, well, it's about solving problems, right? Not only creatively, but with a process. There's also, I think, another school of thought that's like, well, design is like the pretty layer, oh, I just need to send it to the designer to make it kind of pretty. I actually think both are true. I think good design is around your kind of target audience. It kind of reduces friction. It does a lot to kind of just really, make it better for the user. And I think doing that with style and aesthetics rather, is important, right? I think that more than anything, so not only solving the right problems, making it kind of beautiful, but I think it has the opportunity to tap into emotions, right? And that's usually a pretty powerful thing. I think design is also kind of rooted in looking at the world through the world of the person that you're designing it for, right? So it can also help build a culture of, like, empathy, constant reframing around, like, a customer, especially with today's day and age. Like, there's so much choice, right? There's so many different vendors somebody could buy from. As a patient, there's so many different providers you can go to. You're being marketed to constantly. I think with design and really understanding your customer and standing out and kind of really caring, I think it sets companies up for success in today's day and age.
That's interesting. I never thought about it from the emotional standpoint, although I think we've all felt it, right? Whereas, like, oh, this software does exactly what I need, but I hate to look at it, right?
Yeah. Or this one little thing is really annoying and I can't why did they do it that way? It'd be so much easier if they just did it this way, right?
Yeah, exactly. There is an emotional component that I think we don't fully process and understand, but we've probably all felt before. So that's interesting.
We used to have a doctor talk about software design, and he was like, whenever I use the software, my blood pressure goes down. Like, I'm in the practice, everything's so busy, it's so crazy, but I just see the colors and I see how easy it is, and I'm just like, wow, like, okay, like, it just changes their overall mood, I guess, in an interesting way.
Interesting. So as you look at it, what are some of the keys to, like, a good brand and how they present themselves? What are some things that people could really glob onto and say, oh, that makes sense, let's do that?
Yeah. I think brand is a big word, right? So just for clarity's sake, I think brand is ultimately your market's perception of you, right? Having said that, I think as marketers, it's our job to align that company's position, customer experiences, key touch points to that kind of desired perception. I think it really starts at knowing your buyer, your choosers, people buying it, also the users, the folks who actually be using your solution or whatever it is. understanding that market landscape, so the context of which your solution is presented and used. And then I think finally you have to like, ultimately like live up to that promise, obviously, right? So like from a visual perspective, from a visual identity perspective, I actually think we were talking about this earlier, just like, kind of, it looks like it's like the clothes that you wear, right? So if you're trying to position yourself as a leading company, you probably wouldn't be wearing clothes that's, let's say, way out of fashion or not appropriate for like a specific occasion. And so just like fashion, there are like these like classics that break apart from the trend cycle that kind of like withstand the test of time. So, but still like, you can't be wearing something that just people are like, what is that? Right. So we try to design brands that are, kind of iconic, longer lifespan, evolve as trends kind of come and go. But I think from a, kind of what is the right kind of brand, I think it's like, you have to be relevant. You have to kind of look the part, and you want to be kind of present yourself intelligently and smartly amongst your peers.
I mean, let's talk about that a bit more, because I guess I could make an argument that, maybe you are the 70s brand, right? That wears the bell bottoms and the, whatever, or whatever it might be, right? That, so should the brand look to stand out from the crowd, or is that too risky for brands? And kind of how do you work through that decision-making process? I mean, we see it with startups, right? Are they wearing a t-shirt and, being kind of really casual as part of their brand, right? Versus, the suit and coat and whatever it might be. Like, how do you approach that from should they stand out from the crowd, or should they avoid that, because that's too risky?
Yeah. So on the brand that wants to be the bell bottom 70, right? So I think it does all come down to authenticity. So like if that's who you are and you own it and you wear it and it's just part of your personality, like that's okay, right? That's fine. You don't want to be the person wearing something who maybe, is unintentionally wearing something that is just not right. And it just kind of looks like you don't get it, like you're not really kind of like aware.
And how does that scale, right? Like, I mean, maybe I can own the 70s, which I can't, right? I can't grow the mustache, but then as I grow the team, does that mean everyone has to? Like that becomes a problem, right?
Yeah. So again, it's kind of like who does it, authentically themselves and better. So it's something that you kind of have to constantly like feed and invest in and grow and evolve. I think on the topic of standing out, I think it does come down to the brand strategy. So you look at where you are as a company, you look at, who are you getting compared to? Standing out could be a viable strategy. It likely, oftentimes can be, but it needs to jive with like your values, with who you are, right? And so like, I think when you think about what you're optimizing for in terms of standing out or whatever strategy you have, generally speaking, you want to optimize for recall and recognition, right? So like, it's a really good test if somebody can draw your logo from memory. Some people can pass that test easily for their company. Some cannot, or at least kind of like generally like draw like the key aspects of it, right? From a visual identity perspective, thinking about like campaigns and different content that's being engaged with, you definitely want somebody to be able to say, oh, hey, I recognize it. I've seen that. I know that's that company. That builds affinity. I think it also builds like more mind share in the audience. And, as we know, people have to see things many times before they start to engage. And so that kind of builds that overall general awareness.
Man, I think everyone wants to do that test now and go ask someone to draw their logo. Because you're right. There's some that, I'm like thinking through all the vendors I worked with and how many could I draw the logo. That's a challenging, but I think that is the key, right? Is like, how well does your brand, and I mean, we're kind of talking visual identity right now, right? And we talked, clothing as well, but from a visual identity standpoint, is that the goal? Is really just how memorable am I? Am I recognized? Is that the main goal, or are there other aspects that should be really thought of when it comes to the brand?
I think generally speaking, recall is an important one. But I think it really does come down to like, what is the problem that the company is trying to solve? And then how is the brand going to serve that problem, right? The business problem. It could be a later stage company who has not, invested in their look in a long time, and they have, kind of startups nipping at their heels. It could be a younger stage organization or company or startup that is trying to look a lot bigger than they are, because they are competing against these, big companies with big sales teams and a big budget and all those kind of things, right? So, so I do think it's situational, but generally speaking, you want people to be able to have that recognition so that that engagement kind of continues. And there's also that kind of like, I don't want to say pride, but this idea of like, hey, that's my tribe. That's the company that I trust, that I use. And I can quickly, ultimately, the brand is about carving out a little piece of someone's brain and saying, okay, like this is how I know about this company and all the things that are associated with it. And the visual aspect of that is a really big component of it as well.
Interesting. It's a great way to look at it. So how cohesive should the brand be across things like your product, your website, PR, social? I mean, there's so many touch points these days, I think, that impact that, that brand, like how cohesive could it be? And what are some keys to maybe creating this cohesion that you've experienced? Because you've dealt with this across a lot of different companies.
Yeah, this is actually a complicated topic. And I apologize for saying the same thing, but I think it depends. But
we'll have to have you back for another episode and dive deep into the.
Look, I think cohesive is the operating word that you said there, and I think the answer is ideally as cohesive as it needs to be. That what makes the most sense. So let's look at two extremes, right? So if you think about a B2B company with a brand system that might be very different than the product UI, even though it's the same company, right? So reason being that the marketing site maybe has, shorter headlines, more illustrative style throughout, their materials to tell a story versus a like product UI UX where there's a lot of data, intensive kind of screens that need to be used, or it's a productivity oriented application. So you kind of want the noise kind of out of the way. Mm-hmm. In that instance, things like the fonts, the color palettes, maybe there is some glue between them, but you're kind of optimizing for different like use cases. And there could be tie-ins, et cetera. But again, it's something you have to kind of understand that makes the most sense for that situation. On the other side, you have like a consumer application or a patient application where to the patient, there's really no line between I've bought this thing or I'm using this thing and now it should be different. If they're getting an email or they're getting a notification on their phone or they're going to your website for help or to look something up, it's all just kind of one brand experience. And so that, I think, threshold of like how cohesive it should be is much higher because you don't want this disjointed kind of experience and there's no context for that user or consumer to understand like, why are these things kind of different?
Interesting. Let's talk about, I mean, you bring up something really interesting that the font can impact someone, right? And that's hard for a practical person like me to understand. So give me a feel for that. Like, in my mind, everything could just be Helvetica. I don't really care. I'm just making up a font that I know. But like, give me a feel for like how font choice, just a simple example, which I'm sure we could do the same conversation for color, for size, for et cetera, right? Give us a feel for how certain fonts can influence certain feelings, emotions, behaviors.
Yeah. So you're going to have to stop me if I start getting too geeky because
no, we want a little nerdy. I like
we spend a lot of time on typefaces and stuff like that. Look, I think that many fonts have emotions around them. You're literally reading a word that is depicted in a kind of a picture. And so there's a really interesting meme. You can find it out there where there's like one word repeated the same way, but like in 7 different typefaces. And like, they all feel like they have very different meanings. I did this exercise with my daughter. Like we were just kind of like playing around. She like loves to ask me about like what I do. And so I think it was like teddy bear, and I drew teddy bear like in a cute font and like a like really scary, like slasher Halloween style font. And then like a really like formal, like dressed up, and I explained to her, like, look at how all the emotions change with the same level of word. Right. Your question was around like even on the product side. I think that there are fonts that are optimized for user interfaces. They can be displayed at smaller sizes. They're more precise in certain areas. Maybe they don't have as many flourishes. Whereas a headline font, like a marketing font, can be displayed really big, really clean, and maybe it has a little bit more character or emotions or personality to it. But
interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a deep subject, right? That's and I think that's the key is understanding the different uses, right? Because I think we all feel it, but maybe we don't recognize that that's the impact it's having on us.
That's right. It's when I really kind of started to understand typography, and again, like nerding out a little bit, like it's literally how you read words. Like it's the way that you know, kind of get a message, a written message over to somebody. They have to actually look at the alphabet and the sentences. And sometimes, oftentimes that typeface, the way it's laid out is evoking a certain emotion. It could be authority, it could be comfort, it could be whimsical. It could be very streamlined, right? It could be a very serious font, no frills. It's just trying to get the message across. And I don't think people know that. They don't really perceive that at all. But it's there's certainly an attitude that comes with typefaces.
Yeah, makes sense. So as you look at a company, a lot of companies, a lot of marketers I talk to are like, should we rebrand? Right? Like we've had it for a while. Maybe it's getting a little old. Maybe they're, evolving their company. And so they're often, thinking, oh, should we do this? Right. And I think, and sometimes it feels like it's just almost methodical every 3 years. Should we rebrand? Right. There's almost this question. So give us an idea. When should a company go through a rebrand and when should they not?
Yeah. So at our company, we talk a lot about how specificity wins and being very specific about words. So, and that's equally true in healthcare, and also for some of these kind of bigger initiatives, same thing as well. So when we use the word rebrand, we think of a very large effort where you are literally like, kind of facelifting the company, but not only aesthetically outside, there could be a positioning element that comes with it. It could be, how you're talking to customers, your tone of voice, your overall brand strategy, what kind of markets you're going into, et cetera, right? That's a lot that can be packaged in there. It could be, we never really did a real logo because we just were trying to do something really easily and quickly to get going. And now we're like a real company. And like, we really need, a whole fresh new look that represents us. So I want to kind of like, just say that there's a lot that could happen there. So I think that versus like a brand refresh, right? Where you're saying, okay, hey, like, we haven't really maintained this in a while. We haven't, we think it could be a little bit cleaner. We think that, these other companies that we're kind of being compared against, have done a really nice job of kind of really showcasing who they are or reflecting who they are. And we kind of want to do the same. So it's a little bit more incremental. In my experience, I think most founders or executive teams, they kind of instinctually know like when the reality inside their business doesn't match the outside kind of, kind of perception or look and feel. There's like this disjointedness that's like pretty obvious. In terms of like when not to or when to or when not to, I think if it's not really a big pain or this like pain that you're feeling, and you don't have the patience to kind of go through the proper process because not only is it a big investment from, however you're going to execute the actual effort, but there's a lot of change management involved, communication to clients and customers and all that kind of thing. So if it's not this like burning pain, I would say you're probably in a better position to be thinking about it more incrementally and really thinking about what are the metrics that I'm trying to drive that, don't need to be this wholesale kind of change. In other instances, it's very apparent, like we are a very different company today than we were when we first did this. And, we believe that we are going to be the market leader in X. And to do that, we want to show the world, tell the world, and kind of, stand proudly against that. And at that point, I think that's when a serious conversation typically starts.
Yeah, that one seems the more obvious, easier one. But it is interesting, that idea of once it's paining you, right? Like, because if you don't do a serious process on the rebrand, then, change doesn't always mean better, right? And we've seen that with some of the rebrands that you're like, why did they go to all that effort? And it didn't actually improve the situation. But if you have the pain, you know how to solve that pain, or at least you have something to measure against to know, oh, did the rebrand achieve what we wanted to? And if you alleviate that pain, then you can know that, hey, it was achieved.
Yeah. And the customers or, consumers or patients, whoever, you're working with, they typically know, like you can talk to them, you can ask them, hey, tell us about your company, tell us about your perceptions, tell us about, this is what we're saying we're doing. How do you really find value? What really kind of resonates with you in terms of, either the conversations you have with our people or how you use our solution, or software, or whatever it is. And you'll kind of get those themes out of them. And then you can kind of map that back to being like, okay, we present ourselves as this very like serious stoic company, But when I talk to our customers, they're like, oh, everyone's so nice and so, professional and helpful. And you're like,
Mhm.
okay, so that starts to feel like a rift maybe in kind of the opportunity to really, say like to the world, hey, this is who we are. And by the way, as you buy with us or engage with us, you're going to see that down the line. You're going to live up to that promise.
Mm. Do you ever have customers come to you and say, hey, we want to be seen as innovative? And then you talk to the customers and the customers are like, oh, they're really reliable. And there's kind of this disconnect that you're like, okay, so do you want me to create a brand that's innovative, even though your brand is really that you're reliable? Like, how do you manage that kind of disconnect where, the ambition to be innovative versus reliable? That seems like a tough one to kind of resolve.
So again, I think we would probably push on that authenticity. And I think we'd probably present the business value in the case of like, hey, like, I know you want to be in this direction, but we're really hearing, or we believe that there's a lot of conviction and, let's say demand for this, quality or trait. And so I think it's always this kind of like conversation of like who you are and who you want to be
Uh-huh.
sometimes,
Yeah,
right? So
for sure.
sometimes you have a team that's really pushing a vision, they're pushing a new direction, and they're not quite ready for it. So you kind of think about a way that you can ultimately get there. Um, there's going to be instances, where you're going to have a little bit mix of both. But I think that
Sure.
pushing on this idea of like, does it really reflect you, and selling this idea of like, hey, but this is actually what's resonating, what works, and we think it's going to really, help people kind of continue to gravitate towards you.
Yeah, and maybe you try to do both, right? We're
Mhm.
reliable and we're innovative. So start embracing that.
That's right.
It's
That's right.
interesting. So this may be a bit of a loaded question for someone who's so focused on design and brand, but are there times where people spend maybe too much time on brand and they shouldn't worry as much about it?
Yeah. So like your brand is one aspect of marketing, obviously, right? So many cases like direct response or performance marketing, those are going to be what drives your lead flow and pipeline, right?
Mm-hmm.
The predicament is that the brand aspects are kind of really hard to measure,
Mm-hmm.
typically speaking. Um, Having said that, it's foundational. It's a foundational element that either helps or hurts the things that you can measure, right? So I think from like a pure design perspective, I think that more and more we live in a very visual world these days, right? Like, everyone's using social media. We're just images are just like a lot of what we consume. And so by focusing on the design aspect of your content, your experiences, your copy, whatever it is, any content that you're doing rather, it's a really unique way to kind of tell your story and kind of make sure that you're maximizing that potential for engagement.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really interesting point as far as it impacts everything else you do. So all the direct response, the digital marketing, et cetera. If your brand is poor, then it's may be impacting your digital marketing efforts, et cetera.
That's right.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, as we kind of wrap up, are there some trends in design and branding that people should keeping an eye on, things that you're watching and seeing and like, oh, some people may want to think about this, or is it like fads? I don't know. Tell me, what should we be watching for?
Yeah. Look, I think that I don't know if it's a fair answer, but I think that a macro trend is a flight to quality.
Hmm.
So I don't think people these days have patience for, anything that's hard to use, or like an image that's like blurry, or like the worst. Like I've seen this stock photo 1,000 different times and 1,000 different websites, right?
Uh-huh.
So I think companies are getting very serious about like the visual quality, and just kind of like, everything that they do so that, it comes across professional. It comes across as a company who, takes these things seriously. And I think that's a reflection of, everything they do downstream. Stylistically, I don't like to talk about trends because I feel like every brand is unique and there's a lot of like mini trends maybe within
Mhm.
certain like visual styles.
Interesting.
The one thing that like we definitely see is like brands becoming more friendly, right? So I think that at the end of the day,
Hmm.
we're designing for people. Healthcare can feel very cold sometimes. And so I think people are looking for that signal that says like, we really care. And like people are smart. People can sense that stuff. If they can feel like if you just slap something together, it's like, I don't really know if they, if they're that, considerate of what they're putting together. And so I think people are just like very allergic to anything that may be too transactional in nature.
Hmm.
And so I do think this, like, how do you have a more authentic conversation, whether it's the tone, whether it's the visuals, whether it's just, how the kind of channels that you choose to do marketing on. I think there's a lot of things that are kind of going away from things that are maybe just, too kind of disconnected or ivory tower type of approach.
Yeah. Great insights. Well, Mike, this was a lot of fun. I loved getting nerdy with you on my design side since I am not a designer. So you taught me a lot, and I think the HitMIC community is going to really appreciate it, and appreciate Atomic Health coming on as a sponsor of the HitMIC conference. So looking forward to having you there. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare marketing content like this, be sure to check it out at hitmic.com. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, John. See you soon.